What are you at, friends and subscribers? My name is Troy and welcome back to Facility D20. This is going to be the first in a two-part video series where I show you guys how I achieve my Necron paint scheme using some pretty cool Vallejo Colorshifter Paints. Now, I've been into 40k since the late 90s, and I'm super pumped about Indomitus, and I decided to try my hand on a new color scheme for the Necron Warriors. So, without further ado, I'm going to take you guys in and show you guys how I accomplished this color scheme. In this part, we're going to be showing you guys the assembly, the base coating, and the shadowing of these models. In part 2, we're going to be showing you guys the highlights, the object source lighting, the basing, and the final touches. So guys, in preparation for the new Indomitus launch, I decided to go ahead and pick myself up a Necron Overloard and paint it up using these Vallejo Colorshifter Paints. I picked these up a while back and I was anxious to try them out. They look pretty cool, but I didn't know how they would take to the model. So the first thing I had to do here was take it out of the sprue and make sure all the pieces were there. Just had a quick look at the diagram here. You notice that the arms, legs, torso, staff, shield, all those parts were intact. So then I used a pair of pointed clippers to clip out the sprues. You want to be careful when you're clipping sprues out that you make sure you don't bend them and twist them. A lot of times that'll leave cracks and holes in the model itself that you'll have to fill with green stuff or something. So you want to make sure that you cut them down tight to the sprue, but you don't cut the actual model. Like that, if you wiggle them like that sometimes, if you're not careful, you can rip the model itself. I also like to check the bases sometimes. I see that this one was made in 1999, which is pretty interesting. It's around about the time when I started playing 40k. So once I had all these pieces disassembled, I kind of gave them a once over and checked for any mold lines and little bits of sprue that was remaining. You can clean these off with a file, but I like to clean these off with a X-Acto knife. You want to make sure that you got a really sharp blade though when you're using this X-Acto knife. Cut off the excess chunks of sprue and just carefully scrape away the mold lines. In this particular model, it was really good actually. There wasn't a lot of mold lines. There was a few around his legs that I had to get rid of here, and there was a few around his arms and his back. You can see on his feet here, there's a little bit of a mold line. I just simply removed that one. The staff normally has mold lines. A lot of times these staffs or tubes or gun barrels and stuff like that will have a mold line running down the middle. Sometimes you can kind of just leave it and use it as a part of the aesthetic of the model. So this one I just scraped it off for the most part. Now this is a push fit model. Sometimes these push fit models don't really go together that great, but this one actually went together fairly well. So I just pulled out the box here for a reference to make sure I didn't screw this up and put it on wrong. So I like to use crazy glue gel, and the reason I like to use crazy glue gel is it dries fairly quickly, but because it's gel it stays in place. Unlike the normal crazy glue or super glue that's running and you end up just gluing your fingers to the model, which I've done countless times. So I like to stick with the crazy glue gel these days. So the leg kind of just slid in place, and this arm here, there's no push fit here, it just kind of glues in place. So I had to put a bit of pressure on it and hold it for a little while, but the good thing about the crazy glue, it dries quickly. This weapon here was a little different. It connected at two places. It connected down by his leg amongst this piece of rock and crystal, and it connected up top near his elbow. So it actually held in place fairly well. Then I decided to put his back on. I debated whether or not I was going to fully assemble this model and then paint him, or assemble him after he was painted, but I'm trying to keep in mind that with this Necron scheme that I'm testing out with this new Indomitus set and all the models that I have to paint, I need to keep myself to painting simpler paint jobs, faster paint jobs. I got a bad habit of getting wrapped up in the details and pouring into models for a long time. So throughout this whole build I was trying to keep the mindset of doing a quick paint job. unique but quick paint job, so that's why I decided to fully assemble them and then paint them. That one particular piece of the robe was a bit tricky to get in place, and his head also was a bit tricky to push down in place. But after a while I managed to get them there. Personally, when I paint models, I don't like to pin them. I like to just tack a little tiny bit of glue on the bottom of their feet and stick them to the base temporarily. So here you can see it's fully assembled here. Very, very nicely detailed miniature. He's fairly big actually. He must be sitting at around 32mm scale. So this is my first painting video. It's the first time I set up the camera to try to record something like this. So I ran into a few problems, but I've got a boom arm coming and some new equipment that should help me in the future get closer to the model and a little better angle for painting. So the thing about these Vallejo, here we go, there's a little beer break there. The thing about these Vallejo Colorshifter paints is that they need to be painted with a glass black finish. I don't have any glass black on me that I could shoot through the airbrush, so I just used a bit of Vallejo Model Color Black and a few drops of Vallejo Glass Varnish. I like to mix my airbrush paints up in a separate little tub, and normally I like to add the thinner first, so whether I'm using airbrush thinner or sometimes I use Windex, I like to mix it up in the tub first. So you can see here what I'm doing after I mix the color up. I like to dab a little bit on the piece of paper and rub it with my finger. That's how I personally tell how I need to thin my paints. A lot of things on the internet is not going to help you out here. Like you'll hear the consistency of skim milk or 4:1 or 2:1 or this and that. Personally, it's almost really about feel. One of the biggest challenges you're going to have starting with an airbrush is just getting that paint mix consistent so that it doesn't clog your airbrush. Personally, to me, it just came down to a matter of feel. Even the same paints can mix up differently, especially if you don't take them out for a few months. So once I got this paint kind of mixed up to the right consistency, I loaded it into my airbrush. You can see there, I stuck my finger over the nozzle and just give a quick spray to mix it a little better. When I'm spraying base coat, I usually like to use a piece of cork or this Citadel holder here to just kind of get my hands out of the spray and get better angles at them. So I just quickly give this whole thing a once over with the black here. Just try to get the model totally covered, under, above, left, right, side to side. It's just kind of going at it with my airbrush all over the place here. The nice thing about using your airbrush too to base coat is that you can get that thin base coat. You don't overspray it and kind of get too much paint on there and hide the details. You just want to make sure that when you're doing your base coat that you're getting everywhere and you don't miss any spots. You can see here sometimes too I just like to pull the needle in and out of the airbrush and just clean off any excess that's building up. Started to have a little bit of problems with it here. Might have been slightly too thick, but using it at max pressure was able to kind of get the airbrush to cooperate with me. Now after the first coat was done, you can see I had a little bit more thinner in there and another drop of glass varnish. I found I didn't have quite enough glass varnish in there, so a few more drops of glass mixed up in the airbrush itself really helped. And when I kind of went over it quickly with a second coat of primer, it really kind of made that glass pop through just enough on the model that I figured the Vallejo Colorshifter Paints would take to it. So I've never used these Colorshifter paints before, so I wasn't really knowing what to expect here, but I figured this is a test model for a new scheme, so I might as well go ahead and use it. So again, I made sure I hit the entire model with the gloss black, and when that was finished, I got ready to go with the Colorshifter paints. I decided to go with the old gold, the gray violet, and this really threw me for a loop because when you take it out, it looks super purple. I was like, there's no way that this is going to be like a goldy green color. This is totally going to be purple. So I followed the directions and mixed it 1 part thinner to 4 parts paint, because this Vallejo Colorshifter paint is pretty thin as it was. So that actually sprayed pretty much perfectly through the airbrush. This is a very translucent paint, so I had to lay down multiple thin layers. So when you're laying down thin layers like this, you want to have patience. You don't want to just try to pile the paint on there. It's gonna run and it's gonna build, and it's just not gonna dry properly. So you got to have a little bit of patience when you're applying these thin coats, and just slowly work the colors up over time. It still doesn't take very long. I mean, it dries fairly quickly. One thing I'll warn you guys about this video, the camera has a hard time picking up this color shift paint. It's extremely shiny when you're working with it. Even my desk lights here trying to paint it gave me a lot of trouble because I was getting so much color and light bounce off of the model. But you can sort of see it here shifting from silvers to greens to violets already when I only had basically one coat. So normally when I'm doing a model, I would probably just pick a direction which I would consider the light would come from. So most times I like to do that from above, and I would highlight the model up before I would give it its base coat. But with this paint scheme, I wanted to keep it quick, and I wanted the color shift to kind of stand out. So I decided to just basically do the color shift base coat like I would prime. So you can kind of see the miniature here has got some different colors going on. Around the hips you can see it's purple, and you can see the greeny silver throughout the rest of the model. Once that was done, I figured I had to go in and kind of add some details, some gold and silver details. So I picked out Formula P3 cold steel color. I really like the P3 metallics. I just find they work nicely and they lay down nicely for me. So I don't know why that is, but I tend to like the P3 metallics. It's a personal preference. So I decided to go in and pick out any tubes around his legs and his arms and his shoulders, and just kind of work the colors up like that. So I decided to use my dry palette here. I was going to use a wet palette, but when you're working with metallic paints, it's probably best not to use a wet palette. And the reason for that is the fine metal flakes of a metallic paint will seep through your parchment paper and kind of get down into your sponges of your wet palette. So I decided not to use a wet palette, and I was only doing a little bit of silver work, so I just went ahead and used my normal cheap palette I picked up at Michael's, I believe. So again, I'm going to have a little bit of setup next time for my painting videos with a boom mount, and to kind of get a better angle, a little more clarity here. Throughout this video I get a little better as I took different sessions to paint this mini. But what I wanted to do here was lay down the silver along any tubes that I found on the mini. So you can see here I kind of worked them up along his shins and along the back of his legs. I wanted to be very careful here and not to get it on the color shift paint, because the thing about the color shift paint is not very forgiving. If you start to make mistakes and you start to smear a lot onto the color shift paint, there's no real easy way to cover it up. If you want to go back in with a brush and kind of cover up a mistake or a place where you smeared the paint is very difficult. It can be done, but it takes some work. So I was very careful to make sure that I was slowly and carefully applying the silver and golds. There were some bits around his elbows that I had to get at. Also, when you're using metallics, it's a good idea to use your older brushes, because metallics are fairly hard on brushes. So then I decided I wanted to give some more silver details. So I went with the spine along the backpack in the P3 cold steel as well. And I found that the silver here just helped break up the monotone, believe it or not, of the color shift paint. Once that was done, I decided to work up some gold colors. So I went ahead and used Formula P3 Blighted Gold. And I really like this gold as a base because it's an old tarnished looking gold, and it really works well for a base coat gold. From there you can work your gold colors up, but laying this down first, or maybe even a dark brown, really helps to work up your gold. But where this was a metallic miniature, I decided to kind of go all in and just go full of metallics here. So I went and laid down a nice smooth watered down base coat of lighted gold. From time to time you'll see me scoop up a little bit of water on my brush and just kind of use that to smoothen out the gold. And you don't want to go at your metallics. They start to dry fast, and when they start to dry you really don't want to be brushing them to add in brush strokes. But I got a little impatient waiting for it to dry and brushed out the airbrush just to throw some air on it and get this thing to dry, which is a good idea. If you got an airbrush, you can always use it to dry your miniature. But here now you can start to see some of this metallics coming through. One thing I got to say though, in real life this thing definitely hues more green, and it looks a little more silver in these pictures. So once that was done, I decided to use Citadel Nut Oil shade and go in and hit all the silver spots that I did. So you can see I hit around the staff, the kneecaps, the thighs, and I hit this twice. I did 2 coats of nut oil over all the silvers. And I found that worked really well for bringing the color up to what I wanted. Then I decided what I was going to wash the gold in. I was trying to decide between a Secret Weapon Armor wash or a Army Painter mid-brown tone. Because I usually would use Sepia wash, but I was out. But this Army Painter Quick Shade mid-tone brown worked really well on gold. So I decided to go with the brown after, and just did a little test piece on the staff to make sure I was happy with how it laid over the gold. Which I was, so I decided to go ahead and hit up all the gold bits with this wash. And I like to consider this part of the base coat in terms of laying down some dark shadows that I can work my highlights up over. So I went a little heavy with the wash on the gold. I wanted that weathered gold look, so you can see here I really went heavy on it. The nice thing about the Army Painter washes though, they don't seem to dry and so streaky or pooly as the Citadel washes, but I kind of went a little overboard here, and if there's times when you do that, you can just go in with your brush and remove some of the excess wash if you got a little bit too much. But just don't wait too long, because you don't want to be removing it when it's dry. You kind of want to get it while it's still wet. So here you can see, like I said earlier, I went in with the second coat of nut oil and hit all the silver parts the second time. And I done this because I really wanted to bring the bright, vibrant silver down into a nice muted tone. I find 2 coats of nut oil over a mid-tone silver really helps kind of actually get that non-metallic metallic look, believe it or not, using metallic paints. So once that was done, I set it down and I let it dry, and I considered that, I basically consider this my base coating and shadowing done. So guys, that was part 1 of this video. I hope you enjoyed it. Part 2 is coming up. You can click on the link that's about to pop up here. In that video, I'm going to take you through the object source lighting, the basing, the highlights, and the final touches, so you don't want to miss that. This thing turned out pretty cool at the end of the day, and I love to show you guys how we accomplished it. So if that's something you're interested in, go ahead, hit that subscribe button. Stick around to the next video. Take care, guys.